Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the final reading in the James Madison University Creative Writing Program's Fall Reading Series. Also, happy first night of Hanukkah and happy 190th birthday to Emily Dickinson. My name is Erica Kavanaugh. I chair the Creative Writing Program at James Madison University. Tonight's readers are Lauren K. Alleyne and Sofia Samatar, who I will introduce more thoroughly before each of them reads. Before we launch into those readings, I want to thank Madison White, the Creative Writing Program's intern, for creating the flyers for this event. I also wish to thank Angela Carter, who helped with the advertising, and also my two wingmen tonight, who will be telling me whether anything goes awry with this internet adventure that we're on, this live broadcast. And those two men are Greg Wren and Brant Jones. Thank you so much. First, the first reader for tonight's reading is Lauren K. Alleyne, then followed by Sofia Samatar. And when each of them is done reading, and they'll both read for about 20, and I tell them 22 minutes, give or take, we will have a question and answer section for about 10 or so minutes. If you are watching this on Zoom right now, you'll see in your Zoom box a little icon for Q&A. You can click on there and submit a question at any time during this broadcast. Okay. So first, I'm about to introduce Lauren. So Sofia, we'll see you in a little while. Okay. Lauren K. Alleyne is the author of two collections of poetry, Difficult Fruit and Honeyfish. She's also the co-editor of Furious Flower, Seeding the Future of African American Poetry. Her work has appeared in numerous publications, including the New York Times, The Atlantic, Ms. Muse, Tin House, and Guernica, among others. Her most recent honors include a 2020 NAACP Image Award nomination for Outstanding Poetry. She was shortlisted for the Library of Virginia Awards in Poetry and the long list for the Bocas Prize for Caribbean Literature. She is currently an associate professor of English at James Madison University and the assistant director of the Furious Flower Poetry Center. Lauren, I hand it over to you, and I am so excited to hear you read.
Thank you, Erica. Thanks everyone for being here. Special thanks to the Creative Writing Program for hosting these wonderful events, to hear my colleagues' work. Thank all of you in the audience out there who I cannot see, but I believe that you're there. And I'm going to start with a poem from my first collection, Difficult Fruit. And I'm sort of having my students in mind. I don't know if they're here, but this is a teaching poem. And so, Dear Autumn, this poem too late remembers you. And before I get into the poem, I also I guess part of what made me think of this particular poem, it's a little sad, so I want to clarify, is that I keep reminding my students, whatever they're doing in the midst of a global pandemic, in a time of acute crisis in the country. And so, and as much as I want them to be poets and do poetry things and hope that poetry can offer them a way through, I also understand that there's sometimes acute things that are pressing that poetry can't solve. And as a teacher, and a poet, I have to reconcile with that a little bit. So, Dear Autumn, this poem too late remembers you. You're the new girl, body turned away from the circle, foot scuffing the floor. You don't want to belong. And who can blame you? They're a ragged bunch, the girls at the center, sullen, spaced out, or screaming in corners until the uniforms come to shake the sound out or muffle it with the rattle of pills. But for an hour each week, I come with my handouts and books. We huddle over puzzles, sonnets, haiku, then tensed over your pencils. You're supposed to find your own words. I'm here, you write, because they want me to tell them what he did. But I'm not reading this yet. I'm just watching how your face seems so young and so weary, your eyes between flicker and flayed as you scribble into the notebook you will not be allowed to keep. I think poetry can save you, but you're not interested in poems. Your reality demands answers. It's true, he touched me, but I don't want him to go to jail. He's a good person. He just needs help, Miss Lauren, you write. What should I do? Your careful penmanship loops and curves across the page. Its literal plea defying the break of stanzas, meter, or line. Home at my desk, I discard note after futile note. Dear Autumn, you are brave and beautiful. Dear Autumn, no one deserves. The world is unjust sometimes, dear Autumn, but have faith, dear Autumn, dear Autumn, this poem, dear Autumn, I never get it right. So I am thinking about, again, my students, and we spent a lot of time thinking about modality this semester, and this is a persona poem, and it's written in the voice of Trayvon Martin's hoodie. The hoodie stands witness for Trayvon Martin. I was built for bodies like his, between boy and man, sauntering in angles he couldn't hold, but swung his limbs from, careful, cool in every step. I can tell you the story of him, unexceptional. He put change and candy into my pockets, the necessary jangle of keys and cell phone hushed in the sock of me. I watched him from the soft pile he made of me on the floor of his messy adolescent room where I lay beside his sneakers and backpack. He did his homework with chat windows open. White headphones hooked him into some steady beat. That day, he was thinking of nothing in particular. He was quiet in his skin, tucked into the shade of me. He was an easy embrace until an old ancestral fear lay its white shadow across us like an omen. I can tell you how his many hairs raised in warning beneath me. His armpits funked me up with terror. His saunter slipped into a child's unsteady totter under the weight of a history staggering behind him, mad with its own power. He clung to me then, wholly unmanned, a baby clutching his blankie. He pulled me close and I stroked his head, caressed the naps he had brushed to waves that morning. I felt him brace his bones beneath me, his heart 1,000 beating drums. The bullet ripped through us like a bolt of metal lightning. His blood, losing its purpose, ran into me, and I wished we were truly a single body, that I could have held its rush and flow like a second sweaty skin. I can tell you how his spirit slipped out, like steam from cooling water, slowly fading by degrees until he stilled. This is a request poem. I once had the pleasure of reading with Jamaica Kincaid, an idol of mine, and she said she loved this poem. And then another person in my life really loves this poem. And this is to say, poets, you don't always know which poems are the ones that are going to resonate with your audiences. So in Difficult Fruit, I write a lot of letters to myself at different ages. And this one is to myself at the age of 14. And usually I just say, just remember 14 when all you wanted to do was be grown. 14. How the bud yearns to flower, believing that bloom is all beauty, perfuming the bliss of pluck. How she knows nothing of uprooting, the constraints of glass, the burden of perpetual brightening. When she blossoms in her dreams, she is only the full rose of herself, free at last from the inconvenient root. How she strains against her greenness, prays for the day a hand will lift her away. Ah, rose, let us not tell her of wither. Let her turn her best face to the sky. And I will close out Difficult Fruit with this last poem. When the Angels Come. And it's written after another poet, Roger Bonnet-Rigard's poem, Brutal Instructions for the Lovely Death. We're doing a lot of after poems, affinity poems in my class. When the angels come, let them bring wings. Let the wings be poems exquisite with the give of each I am. Let the music be a harmonic of steel pan and surf, Congo drum and share, my godmother's shaky soprano and the sweet thud of flesh falling away. Let my thousand cells sing. Let me tug my loved ones' coats and let them catch me in the afternoon's solitary star. Let the dead make way with hallelujahs. In their rain voices, let them whisper to me. Let each lived moment of love light a path from this world to the next. O gods, when you call me, in all the names I have worn through with breathing, let me answer with joy. Let me go up. Let me go dancing, ecstatic with flight. So I am switching over to Honeyfish, the second collection, and I think we'll talk about poems and the making of poems and the making of books at the end. And I'm gonna start this poem, this section actually with a poem called Variations in Blue, which is written for Frank X. Walker, a poet. And the epigraph is a little conversation between Frank and myself. Frank says, I don't know how to swim. And I'm like, what? And then he says, there were no pools for Black folks when I was coming up. Variations in Blue. In sleep's 3D theater home, a green island surrounded by the blue of ocean. Zoom to the heart, see the Kufa swimming pool filled with us, Black children shrieking our joy in a haze of sun. Our lifeguard Rodney, his skin flawless and gleaming black as fresh oil. His strut along the pool's edge, his swoon-worthy smile. Daddy, a beach ball bellied Poseidon, droplets diamonding his afro. My brother hollering as he jumps into his bright blue fear, his return to air gasping and triumphant. And there, the girl I was, dumpling thick and sun-brown, stripped down to the red two-piece suit my mother had made by hand, afloat in the blue bed of water, the blue sky beaming above. When I wake up, I'm in America, where Dorothy Dandridge once emptied a pool with her pinky, and in Texas, a Black girl's body draped in its hopeful tasseled bikini struck earth instead of water. A policeman's blue-clad knees pinning her back, her indigo wail a siren. I want this to be a dream, but I am awake, and in this place where the only blue named home is a song, and we are meant to sink, to sputter, to drown. So we did a lot of forms in my class, and this next poem is a villanelle, which is a poem of repeating lines and repeating rhymes. So if you hear the same line, it's not that I ran out of things to say. It makes you do it. Visa villanelle. First, the gathering of proof, your life's story reduced to a paper jam of required documents, evidence of the right shape of your history. Surrender every expectation of privacy. Release the statements, Provide your fingerprints. Prove you have nothing to hide. Your life's story, unremarkable in its mundane trajectory of dream, desire, struggle, overcoming, testament to the harmless shape of your history. Leave home at midnight. Drive through the wee hours to arrive at the embassy door first with your gathered proof, your rehearsed story. Stand in the chilled, streetlit dark, pray the rosary. Repeat again and again to still your heavy beating heart. You have all the evidence, all the right forms. This is but a footnote in your history. Dawn. Sunlight opens the day like a key. Wipe the weary from your eyes. Enter. State your intent. Offer the proof of your life. Tell its story. Provide evidence. Give it the shape that will become your history. So in Honeyfish, I spend a lot of time thinking about and writing about Black folks in America killed by police violence. And this poem is a renga, which is another form. It begins with a narrative and it alternates between haiku and couplets. And so post-verdict renga for Trayvon Martin, Provincetown, Massachusetts. Heat, bodies gleaming with sweat and sun, day pressing itself against everything, unforgiving, and walking down the street thinking of another walk in another city, of a boy who never makes it home. I too am armed with thirst and a craving for sweetness. I too wear his brown skin and do not belong here to the city of leisure and narrow streets. Fear passes through me, a phantom, and is gone. Overhead, flags flutter in the thick, salty air. Not guilty, they say. Not guilty, not guilty, not guilty, not guilty, not guilty. Beginning is red. A door, a car, the bowed lips, a nameless flower. I have so few names for things here, I fall into silence. Two men, black as God, their shirts golden as morning, no words between us. So much passes in the glance that the throat cannot muster. Three headless torsos in a store window. A light trick makes men of them. In the city of flesh, you can almost forget the ghosts. Fat daylilies crown long green stalks, their orange heads the color of grief. No candlelight vigils here, only the living, living. He walks oak brown, bald, belly like a commandment. I am here, make way. Nothing I say will save you, but how can I say nothing? Thick black curls cut close, black buttoned shirt, caramel face diamonded with sweat, a dark, ageless face, wise and innocent as earth. How have you survived? I can't stop counting the bodies that look like yours. 5 this whole morning. I can't say if this matters, just that I saw. I did see. Play, an elegy for Tamir Rice. I watched the video and wished I hadn't. I knew I had to witness the boy being a boy before he becomes a corpse, and the moments, brief as breath, between his playing killer and dying, between his shooting the air and collapsing. Is that even the word for it? The startled descent of a child's bulleted body. I want to say, wait, but in the distance between the urge and the utterance, between lung and lip, 1 1,000, 2 1,000, he is gone. I play the video again and again, trying to hit stop in time to keep him alive. I make a black boy Lazarus of him, minus the miracle. The bullet, faster than fingers or hope, wins every time. Heaven, for Sandra Annette Bland. Where does a Black girl go when her body is emptied of her? And her wild voice, where does it sing its story when the knots of history make a grave of her throat? What of her future, blue broken, unmade, her name, say it, Sandra, unhoused, her dreams and memories lost to their source? Where does a Black girl's love go when her heart is snapped shut like a cell door, the key out of reach as any justice? And what gift is lost when a Black girl is made a body, her light dimmed into shadow, gone? How many angels weep when a Black girl is torn into wings? And I will close out the Honeyfish section by reading the title poem, Honeyfish. The catch is so fresh, each bite is blue, the sea still in it and settling on your tongue like prayer. This is what it means to eat, you think, to abandon utensils for the grace of fingers, to hold flesh against flesh, hands slick with what will become inseparable from your own thrumming body. As a child, you loved fried rye, the small fish you ate whole, and imagined them swimming in you, your belly full as an ocean. Now you know better, that nothing consumed lives on as before. When the bone, thin as a wish, lodges itself in the pink flesh of your mouth, refuses offerings of bread or water, becomes an ache that will not be moved, you understand this is what it means to be a body, that what is taken in takes root in ways beyond your choosing. A single bite, and you carry the ocean in your throat. And if I can pull it up, I'm going to read one more poem, I think, maybe two, we'll see how time goes. So I'm doing this because earlier, just before we got on, Sophia was talking about fairy tales, and I too am obsessed with them, and particularly Hansel and Gretel. I think because Disney hasn't managed to ruin it yet, but also I think, the perspective of a young girl still needs to get voice and air in the world. And so Gretel has a lot to say in my life, and I've been writing poems from her persona for many, many years. And of course, I haven't written a whole lot during the pandemic, but Gretel had a couple of things to say. So I think I have time to read these two. Gretel's notes on the pandemic. 1, just like that, you can become the enemy, evidence, symptom, target. 2, this is the world's harshest lesson. Our bodies are fragile fortresses to which we are bound. The breach is always coming until it comes. 3, how fear unmasks us. In it, we learn what we are willing to sacrifice, which are our true gods. 4, some will pray, even as they cast you out. Some will say your nightmare is of your own making. Some will lay their souls at the feet of any power. Some will pay whatever price honor demands. Some will play music from the rooftops, clear notes ringing through the deathly silence. 5, nothing will change, but you will not be the same. Or everything will change, and you will remain yourself. Or both true things will live on together, which is to say, this moment is past and present and always possible. And again, as I said to my students, I just feel like it's important to acknowledge that we are in December of 2020, and 281,000 people who were here in January are not here. And so whatever allowed that to happen in our society, in our country, in our governance, in ourselves, I think we have an opportunity and a mandate to change that. And so with that in mind, this is my last poem, Gretel's Note on Normal. You want, I know, to go back to normal, that distant sepia sweet place your memory has touched up with erasure and longing. I know. I can tell you how in the hell of the cottage, that kidnapping come quarantine, all I could think of was home. I drew the blanket of the familiar over my days and dreams, wept when the new reality of my life poked me with its bony finger, ordered me to rise and cook, all of it a cage I could not break. When at last I bested the witch and found her treasures, my future gleaming possible in my hands, I chose to go back to what I remembered. I write to you now from that place, which is to say, I would go to that girl heaving with relief and remind her that she was no lost sheep, but a lamb sent to the slaughter. I would tell her that the sacrificed are not meant to survive the cut, that return is another word for rewounding. I would tell her she has been sharpening the formidable weapon of her mind, that her hands can build as well as burn. Forget normal and back and happily ever after. I would say to her, imagine otherwise. Thank you.
Thank you, Lauren. That was beautiful and so moving. And while you were reading, I was writing down all these questions. I was just inspired throughout. So thank you so much. I'm going to introduce Sofia now. Sofia Samatar is the author of the novels A Stranger in Olandria and The Winged Histories, the short story collection Tender, and Monster Portraits, a collaboration with her brother, the artist Del Samatar. She is the recipient of the William L. Crawford Award, the Astounding Award for Best New Writer, the British Fantasy Award, and the World Fantasy Award. Sofia, I'm so excited to hear you read, and I'm going to disappear now. See you soon.
Bye, Erica, although you're still here. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate it that you're with us. Thank you, Erica, for inviting me and also for organizing this wonderful reading series that we've had through the JMU English department. It's so great that even in these times, we can still, have our literary evenings, which is just a really, it's wonderful to be a part of. And also, Lauren, thank you for the reading. Love the Gretel poems. Yeah, Lauren and I were talking before we started, and I mentioned that I have a number of students here from a course that I'm currently teaching on fairy tales. And so that was great that you had some fairy tale poems to read. The other class I'm teaching is on North African literature. And I know that I have at least one student from that class here as well. So I'm going to read to you from a story that sort of hits both of those areas. It's very steeped in folklore. And although it is really set in East Africa rather than North Africa, it does involve Sudan, which of course is a country that participates in both of those areas. The story is called Ogres of East Africa. This is a story from my collection Tender, and it originally appeared in an anthology called Long Hidden: Speculative Fiction from the Margins of History. The story is set in Kenya, about 100 years ago, a little more, early 20th century, and it is narrated by a young man named Ali Bai, who is a clerk for a white big game hunter. Ali Bai himself is a Kenyan Asian, so he is a Kenyan with roots in the Indian subcontinent. And this is a story that is told in 12 ogres, and I'm going to read you 7 of them. So here we go, a story in ogres. Ogres of East Africa. Catalogued by Ali Bai M. Musaji of Mombasa, February 1907. 1. Apul Apul, a male ogre of the Great Lakes region. A melancholy character, he eats crickets to sweeten his voice. His house burned down with all of his children inside. His enemy is the hare. My informant, a woman of the Highlands who calls herself only Mary, adds that Apul Apul can be heard on windy nights, crying for his lost progeny. She claims that he has been sighted far from his native country, even on the coast, and that an Arab trader once shot and wounded him from the battlements of Fort Jesus. It happened in a famine year, the year of fever. A great deal of research would be required in order to match this year when, according to Mary, the cattle perished in droves, to one of the years of our Lord, by which my employer reckons the passage of time. I append this note, therefore, in fine print and in the margins. Always read the fine print, Ali Bai, my employer reminds me when I draw up his contracts. He is unable to read it himself. His eyes are not good. The African sun has spoilt them, Ali Bai, he says. Apul Apul, Mary says, bears a festering sore where the bullet pierced him. He is allergic to lead. 2. Bahati, a grave dweller from the environs of the ancient capital of Kush. The Bahati possesses a skeletal figure and a morbid sense of humor. Its great pleasure is to impersonate human beings. If your dearest friend wears a cloak and claims to suffer from a cold, he may be a Bahati in disguise. Mary arrives every day precisely at the second hour after dawn. I am curious about this reserved and encyclopedic woman. It amuses me to write these reflections concerning her in the margins of the catalog I am composing for my employer. He will think this writing fly tracks or smudges from my dirty hands. He persists in his opinion that I am always dirty. As I write, I see Mary before me as she presents herself each morning in her calico dress, seated on an overturned crate. I believe she is not very old, though she must be several years older than I. But I am very young. Too young to walk like an old man, Ali Bai, says my employer. Show some spirit. As she talks, she works at a bit of scarlet thread, plaiting something, perhaps a necklace. The tips of her fingers seem permanently stained with color. Where did you learn so much about ogres, Mary? Anyone may learn. You need only listen. What is your full name? She stops plaiting and looks up. Her eyes drop their veil of calm and flash at me. In annoyance? In warning? I told you, she says. Mary, only Mary. 3. Degder, a female ogre of Somaliland. Her name means long ear. She is described as a large, heavy woman, a very fast runner. One of her ears is said to be much longer than the other, in fact, so long that it trails upon the ground. With this ear, she can hear her enemies approaching from a great distance. She lives in a ruined hovel with her daughter. The daughter is beautiful and would like to be married. Eventually, She will murder Degder by filling her ear with boiling water. My employer is so pleased with the information we have received from Mary that he has decided to camp here for another week. Milk her, Alibi, he says, leering. Eh? Squeeze her. Get as much out of her as you can. My employer always shouts, as the report of his gun has made him rather deaf. In the evenings, he invites me into his tent, where, closed in by walls, a roof, and a floor of Williston canvas, I am afforded a brief respite from the mosquitoes. A lamp hangs from the central pole, and beneath it, my employer sits with his legs stretched out and his red hands crossed on his stomach. Very good, Alibi, he says. Excellent. Having shot every type of animal in the protectorate, he is now determined to try his hand at ogre. I will be required to record his kills, as I keep track of all his accounts. It would be damn fine, he opines, to acquire the ear of Degder. Mary tells me that one day, Degder's daughter, racked with remorse, will walk into the sea and give herself up to the sharks. 4. Imu. Imu transports his victims across a vast body of water in a ferry boat. His country, which lies on the other side, is inaccessible to all creatures save ogres and weaver birds. If you are trapped there, your only recourse is to beg the weaver birds for sticks. You will need 7 sticks in order to get away. The first 2 sticks will allow you to turn yourself into a stone, thereby escaping notice. The remaining 5 sticks enable the following transformations: thorns, a pit, darkness, sand, a river. Stand up straight, Alibi. Look lively, man. My employer is of the opinion that I do not show a young man's proper spirit. This, he tells me, is a racial defect and therefore not my fault, but I may improve myself by following his example. My employer thrusts out his chest. Look, Alibi! He says that if I walk about stooped over like a dotard, people will get the impression that I am shiftless and craven, and this will quite naturally make them want to kick me. He himself has kicked me on occasion. It is true that my back is often stiff, and I find it difficult to extend my limbs to their full length. Perhaps, as my employer suspects, I am growing old before my time. These nights of full moon are so bright, I can see my shadow on the grass. It writhes like a snake when I make an effort to straighten my back. 5. Katanda Baliko. While most ogres are large, Katanda Baliko is small, the size of a child. He arrives with a sound of galloping just as the food is ready. There is sunshine for you, he cries. This causes everyone to faint, and Katanda Baliko devours the food at his leisure. Katanda Baliko cannot himself be cooked. Cut up and boiled, he knits himself back together and bounces out of the pot. Those who attempt to cook and eat him may eat their own wives by mistake. When not tormenting human beings, he prefers to dwell among cliffs. I myself prefer to dwell in Mombasa, at the back of my uncle's shop, Musaji and Company. I cannot pretend to enjoy nights spent in the open, under what my employer calls the splendor of the African sky. Mosquitoes whine, and something, probably a dangerous animal, rustles in the grass. The Somali cook and headman sit up late exchanging stories, while the Kavirondo porters sleep in a corral constructed of baggage. I am uncomfortable, but at least I am not lonely. My employer is pleased to think that I suffer terribly from loneliness. It's no picnic for you, eh, Alibi? He thinks me too prejudiced to tolerate the society of the porters and too frightened to go near the Somalis, who, to his mind, being devout Sunnis, must be plotting the removal of my Shia head. In fact, we all pray together. We are tired and far from home. We are here for money, and when we talk about money. We can discuss calculations for hours, what we expect to buy, where we expect to invest. Our languages are different, but all of us count in Swahili. 6. Kibugi, a male ogre who haunts the foothills of Mount Kenya. He carries machetes, knives, hoes, and other objects made of metal. If you can manage to make a cut in his little finger, all the people he has devoured will come streaming out. Mary has had, I suspect, a mission education. This would explain the name and the calico dress. Such an education is nothing to be ashamed of. Why, then, did she stand up in such a rage when I inquired about it? Mary's rage is cold. She kept her voice low. I have told you not to ask me these types of questions. I have only come to tell you about ogres. Give me the money. She held out her hand, and I doled out her daily fee in rupees, although she had not stayed for the agreed amount of time. She seized the money and tucked it away in her dress. Her contempt burned me. My hands trembled as I wrote her fee in my record book. No questions, she repeated, seething with anger. If I went to a mission school, I'd burn it down. I have always been a free woman. I was silent, although I might have reminded her that we are both my employer's servants. Like me, she has come here for money. I watched her stride off down the path to the village. At a certain distance, she began to waver gently in the sun. My face still burns from the sting of her regard. Before she left, I felt compelled to inform her that, although my father was born at Karachi, I was born at Mombasa. I, too, am an African. Mary's mouth twisted. So is Kibugi, she said. 7. Kipta Bangurian, a fearsome yet curiously domestic ogre of the Rift Valley. He collects human skulls, which he once used to decorate his spacious dwelling. He made the skulls so clean, it is said, and arranged them so prettily that from a distance his house resembled a palace of salt. His human wife bore him 2 sons, one which looked human like its mother, and one called Kiptigan, which resembled its father. When the wife was rescued by her human kin, her human-looking child was also saved, but Kiptigan was burnt alive. I am pleased to say that Mary returned this morning perfectly calm and apparently resolved to forget our quarrel. She tells me that Kiptigan's brother will never be able to forget the screams of his sibling perishing in the flames. The mother, too, is scarred by the loss. She had to be held back, or she would have dashed into the fire to rescue her ogre child. This information does not seem appropriate for my employer's catalog. Still, I find myself adding it in the margins. There is a strange pleasure in this writing and not writing, these letters that hang between revelation and oblivion. If my employer discovered these notes, he would call them impudence, cunning, a trick. What would I say in my defense? Sir, I was unable to tell you. Sir, I was unable to speak of the weeping mother of Kiptigan. He would laugh. He believes that all words are found in his language. I ask myself if there are words contained in Mary's margins, stories of ogres she cannot tell to me. Kipta Bangurian, she says, is homeless now, a modern creature. He roams the protectorate, clinging to the undersides of trains. And I'm going to stop there. As I said, that is 7 out of a total of 12 ogres. And if you really need to find the other 5, you can just Google Sofia Samatar Ogres of East Africa, and you will find them online for free at Uncanny Magazine. So there's no need to live in suspense.
Thank you so much, Sophia. That was fantastic. On so many levels. Hey, Lauren, come on back on. We're going to do some Q&A now.
I had gotten comfortable.
I know, me too. I was completely mesmerized.
Oh gosh, I have to get back on.
I know. So I'm not right now seeing any questions from the audience, but sometimes it takes a little while for them to kind of get into my feed on Zoom. And I know that when we were chatting before the broadcast even went up, that you were saying, oh, we might ask questions of each other. Do either of you have questions for each other that first come to mind before yeah, okay. Lauren, you go first. You ask a question.
Sophia, I love it. And the first thing I thought was, I'm so interested by your interlocutors. You in monster portraits, and like I feel like there's always a person who's giving us these stories and that the stories about what they're about, but it's also, of course, the story of that interlocutor and that speaker. And I'm curious about that device as a writer. Like what's the advantages and disadvantages of having that interlocutor tell the story versus just telling the story of the ogres? What does that allow you to do?
Yeah, thank you. That is a great question. So one thing for me is that in storytelling or in fiction, I always want to know who is talking and why. Mm-hmm. Who is telling this story and why? And I ask myself that when I'm working on a story, and that's often how the story comes together. This means that I am really obsessed with first-person storytelling. And in fact, when I went to put together, when I was choosing the stories to put in the collection, Tender, and kind of trying to figure out, okay, what do my stories share, or how do I pick which ones to put together? Almost all the stories that I had written in over a 5-year period were in first person. They were journals, they were letters. One of them is a paper for a class. They are research projects. They're all these different kinds of first-person narratives. And so I wound up doing a whole book of those kind of narratives. And I think that for me, there's an immediacy and an interest in the feeling that somebody is speaking and somebody is speaking to someone else.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sophia. I'm going to let you ask your question, and then we actually do have a couple of questions that have come in. So you go ahead and ask your question, and then I'll turn it over to the people who have asked questions. Go ahead, Sophia.
My question is, why Gretel? Why is that? I'm just very curious, of all the fairy tales, why is that the one, that story?
No, again, it was sort of a joint thing. When I was in graduate school at Cornell, my roommate, best friend, novelist Catherine Chung, we just got talking, and we said, Hansel and Gretel, like, what is it about this fairy tale that remains untouched? Well, there's no wedding, so that ruins it for Disney, right? But it's also the one where I feel like that wound of like your parents kicking you out, like no matter how they try to make that okay at the end, it's just not. The happily ever after doesn't quite satisfy for either of us, I guess. And also it's about the kids who save themselves, right? Like they save them. Gretel saves Hansel, and so she saves herself. And I think that empowerment of this young girl is so sort of atypical of the fairy tale world, the genre, and so that got fascinating. We just tried, but we're like, we actually don't care about it. So, so we tried like re-envisioning the story and et cetera, and we have, but I think that pluckiness, the resourcefulness, the saving of the self, and then the thing I think that's truest about Tales is that something about that moment is a shaping moment that will carry for the rest of her life. And I think this is what these poems are, right? Like the aftermath. You don't just like, go to a ball and dance or kill your stepmother. Like these things don't just happen and then you put them away and it's over, right? So it's sort of the unraveling of the ever after, like the after keeps aftering, So I don't know, I think.
That's great, thank you. Yeah, agreed.
I so appreciate that. I feel like both of you in your readings, and even in your answer just now, Lauren, opened up these old stories that we thought we knew, but they go on and on as you reimagine them. And as you say, they don't end. They have many aftermaths. So thank you so much. Marco Wilkinson asks, both of you, he says, can you both speak to how you see the fairy tale and or fantasy offering space to political and social commentaries that aren't possible perhaps otherwise? And what is unique about casting these discussions through the lens of the fantastic?
Well,
go ahead. Yeah, go ahead, Sophia. You go.
Yeah, I'm teaching this class, and of course, I am a fantasist. I write fantasy, so this is something I've been thinking about for a while and sort of intensively this semester. I think first of all, what fairy tales offer is a mode of speaking and a mode of storytelling that is there to express things that cannot be expressed in the realist mode. I mean, that is why they take this shape, because they are things that feel unreal, and the usual daily language does not seem to be able to encapsulate those things. And those things can be, there are many different types. In many cases, there are very extreme emotions, trauma, things that actually, when they are being experienced in the real world, they feel unreal. People describe them as like, this is, if you listen to the way people describe, having been in an accident or a severe illness, there's often this sense of like, this seemed impossible while it was happening. And in a similar way, many people's feelings surrounding the way the world works, surrounding politics, right, are like, this is just, I know this is happening, but I can't get my head around it. It seems impossible. It seems unreal. So I think that when people are experiencing those kinds of emotions, the fairy tales with their, structured plots and flat characters, they come along as this kind of language of images that allows some kind of shape and allows you to start putting some kind of shape to those feelings and those experiences. The other thing I would say about fantasy and politics today is that I'm starting to feel like fantasy is really the truest thing out there, because at least a fantasy story is like, this is made up. Like a fantasy story is upfront, right? About I'm giving you everything you need to know. This is a story that I'm telling. And so in some ways, as we're trying to navigate information, and we get a lot of fairy tales that later that are kind of acting like they're not, there's something that I find sort of bracing and refreshing about a fantasy story that's just like, yep, I'm not trying to tell you it's true. It's made up.
I mean, I think all of that, yes. And I think that stories are how we understand the world, right? And so there is something about the framework of the story that continues to serve. The fairy tales, I feel like the little black dress of narrative, right? Like we reach for them when we need them because they're applicable. This is what I found with Gretel. Like for example, how to understand children in foil blankets on the border in cages. Like that is, what is happening there? You know, what, like you were saying, like it seems unreal, unimaginable, and yet it's happening. And I have a Gretel that came out of that, just that image, because I was thinking of what it means for unaccompanied minors, what it means for parents to send their children into the forest, to send them into some kind of unknown space and just hope they find kindness, and what they meet is a witch who wants to eat them, right? What they meet is cruelty, what they meet is heartlessness. And I was like, oh, this is old and it's happening. I don't know. So I think there's a way in which that, again, it sort of helps bend reality into some sort of a more manageable shape. But also I think ideally, and I don't know that that happened with that particular narrative, but see your way out and see your way through, right? If you're like, this is not new, this is a new form of an old ill, you know, and that then the narrative, I think maybe gives us a way to walk through that, Again, for the person who says, how could a parent do that? I'm like, well, you know, there's a story for that, you know.
It happens. Thank you, both of you, for your answers. Another person attending who is remaining anonymous has asked, would love to know what you two are currently reading.
Ooh, that's always a great question. So I am currently reading a fantastic book called The Possessed by Elif Batuman. And it is a combination. It's called like Adventures with Russian Books and the People Who Love Them or something. It's a memoir that's about travel, and it's mostly about literature and about her love for Russian literature. And it's really funny and it's really, really good.
I am also a graduate student, so what I'm reading right now is actually for an independent study I'm doing on the Caribbean and lyric. And so I just finished reading Derek Walcott and Lorna Goodison and Norvisi Phillips. So those are all poets. And in my like non-school time, I'm listening to Isabel Wickerson's Caste, this sort of story of race in America, or there's a subtitle I don't quite remember, all of which I recommend you read. They're all phenomenal writers, and my brain is a little full.
I should mention my audiobook as well, because I've always got like the reading book and then also the audiobook. My audiobook right now is also very good. It's by Jen Chapman, and it's called My Autobiography of Carson McCullers. Very, very good. It's also a memoir, but it's about, and wow, okay, I'm reading 2 memoirs about people who are obsessed with literature. That's weird how that happened. But yeah, this is about her, her research into Carson McCullers' life, particularly after she discovers some love letters between Carson McCullers and another woman, and goes to the biographies of Carson McCullers and finds that there's this, you know, it's this story of a repression of this lesbian life. And so then the author goes in and starts doing research and tries to discover and questions herself along the way about the process of just, you know, what is biography and what does it mean to be obsessed with someone, and to what extent are these things, you know, things we should indulge or not. It's also really good.
I feel like I just got some great recommendations here. Thank you so much, you two. We are reaching the end of our time. You gave so generously tonight of your readings. And I also appreciate the questions and also the cheer going on in the chat. There's a lot of enthusiasm going on in the chat too. So thanks to you who made comments there. We hope that you all stay safe. Also, if you have a break coming up, and we hope you do, you get a little break during these holidays. We have one now, and we have another holiday coming up this month. And then next semester, we will continue with the reading series, but it'll be called the Spring Reading Series. So stay tuned for those. In the meantime, take care of yourselves and be well. Okay. Good night.
Thank you, Erica.
Good night.
Thanks, everyone.
Lauren and Sophia. Bye-bye.